Okay,
All
very
right.
good afternoon. XR has brought a paradigm shift in the way we are looking at information. So we have a very, very, diverse panel this afternoon to look at how XR has been revolutionizing training in the respective fields. So we will start with Ewout. Am I pronouncing it right?
Yeah.
So he will be giving an overview of how XR has been being adopted in the military, followed by Robert Wilde. Wilde, whatever. Okay.
Depends.
Okay. So he'll be talking about how XR has been adopted in the manufacturing field. And finally, we'll have Chris Roos, who will be talking about how XR has been adopted in KLM. So over to Ewout.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Captain Ewout van Dort, Royal Netherlands Army. You maybe saw it on the slide, staff officer within the simulation center for the Army. And basically what I do is we do a lot of simulation training, of course. A lot of things we should be capable of are we not able to do in real. And if we do it in real, maybe it's a bit costly, maybe it's too dangerous, maybe you just don't want it. So therefore, we do very much with simulation for over decades. My role within the simulation center is if it does not exist what we want to have, then I'm going to try to find something, create something, find a partner, create a demonstrator to give us knowledge and give us an idea of what do we really want. And sometimes you have an idea of a training a need, and the real of the accurate simulation solution does not exist yet. Well, that's my role. Within the simulation center, we do a lot of things with regular simulation, with screen-based, but also the XR technology is slightly coming in. For instance, VR-based for our special forces, we do have a system. It's been developed together with an enterprise in the Netherlands, together with the Army for over 10 years of development, since technology 10 years ago wasn't that far yet. Currently it is, so you know that all. To train urban operations, so military operations within a city or something like that, in virtual reality, up to teaming with 15 men together. That's something what we do since a year. And from my perspective, I'm looking into expanding the possibilities of XR. So the AR options, we're looking into that for training and education. There's also a program running for using AR guidance for our personnel out in the field, for instance. Information which usually has been displayed on a 2D screen can be displayed in the field of view as well. Mixed reality, can we use a real object in a virtual scene, and things like that. That's what I'm involved in. I'm glad you are here, and I hope we can discuss differences and opportunities between military and enterprise. Thank you.
thank you. Over to Robert.
Yeah. So my name is Robert Wilde. Depends. I'm working as a software developer and user experience designer at Siemens Corporate Technology, which is the research and development department. And we're working with different divisions of Siemens internally on a virtual reality training, which has its roots basically in the problem that Siemens as an engineering company produces lots of engines, converters, and other stuff that needs to be maintained. And they're expensive, they're rare, they might even be still in manufacturing, and people need to be trained for that. So mechanics, engineers. The idea was to use virtual reality for training before it's even there, or if it's before it's even available. And also to prevent that 20, 30 people need to fly around the globe to one location to train there. And we are developing that, having successes and drawbacks, and finding user experience problems and content generation problems, and yeah, we are still in a testing phase basically, and we're trying to figure out what works, what not works, getting the most out of it basically, and yeah, that's it. So yeah.
Thank you. Over to Chris.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Christopher Roos. I work at KLM Digital Studio, which is a Scrum studio that is a department within KLM, and we do all sorts of research and innovations. And from my point of view, we are in the VR team, so we're looking specifically at the possibilities for VR for training. KLM is a very large organization, 32,000 employees. It's also a somewhat conservative organization. It's been around for 99 years now. So there's a lot of traditions and a lot of established means that have taken place in regards to training, for example. So there's a lot of potential for improvements, both in efficiency and in effectiveness. And that is what we are looking at to see, can we disrupt the training scene within KLM? Can we improve the training effectiveness and efficiency? And we are making great strides on that. We have implemented several training programs right now, and we're developing a lot more. Think about, for example, cabin attendants who have to do training on how to fight fires within airplanes. This is something obviously very dangerous to do, but also very difficult to achieve within a realistic environment. We have real-life simulation where you can extinguish a fire, but that's in some sort of a sea container. Of course, it's you won't get the full complexity and the full immersiveness that you would get in a real airplane. So we're looking into these kind of things. What if you add smoke? What if you add noise? What if you add screaming passengers? What if you have a second crew member who needs to help you and you need to interact with each other? That opens up the whole range of complexities and possibilities that VR can apply to the training mandate. So I'm looking forward to the discussion with you on the possibilities. Sorry, am I interrupting the?
No.
No, that's fine. And discussing with you the potentials and pitfalls of VR training.
Right. Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome.
So there are three discourses that I'm going to talk about, and I want the panelists to address that as well. I'll just switch this one to mine. Yeah, the first discourse is this. I love this quote by Mark Weiser. He said, "A good tool is an invisible tool. By invisible, we mean that the tool does not intrude on your consciousness. You focus on the task, not the tool." So this kind of, tells us what the state of XR is actually now, right? It is still clunky. It is still heavily dependent on a hardware. It is still not, malleable. It is not seamless. So this is one thing that we need to address as we are talking about adoption. The second discourse is this is a famous work by Marshall McLuhan. If you're from the communication studies, you will know this guy. So he said, medium is the message. We shape our tools, and then the tools shape us. So constantly this tension of tools and the society, or tools and the culture, is the second discourse that we need to address when we are talking about XR and adoption. And thirdly, we have seen this many times. When a new technology emerges, you kind of use it as a panacea, right? I have XR. Like this was stated when it came to blockchain. Oh, we can use blockchain for anything. So all these entrepreneurs in the middle, you're constantly seeing them running amok, with the XR solutions. But this is not the way we need to approach this new breed of technology. So these are the core themes that I have that we will quickly, hear out from the panelists to see how they are looking at this particular discourse on technology culture, and the third is the governance, or people going around as XR has the solution for all the problems that the society faces. So the first is the technology problem. How long do you think we'll be needing for this technology to become seamless, so that it could be widely adopted in the in the enterprise or the military or in the manufacturing?
From a military perspective, it's already kind of seamless, since there are already a lot of training going on where we use virtual reality or a kind of a additional reality. For instance, we do gunnery training where we learn how to operate a weapon system, for instance. And right now we do have gunners who rather train in a simulator instead on the firing range, because of all the regulations and limitations and things it takes it with it. So simulation is preferred instead of shooting the real thing, which you obviously would think that they would like better. That's not so. And a good tool is a visible tool. The tool itself does not necessarily has to be invisible. As soon as it needs a manual.
Mm-hmm.
If something needs a manual, then it's maybe not designed well. I don't know if you're familiar with the acronym RTFML. Read that manual. It's something obviously a lot of people do not do. Okay, no manual, just start with the thing. That should be the way. If you have to learn how to operate a learning assisting thing, it's maybe not the right tool. And that's my translation of a tool. A good tool is an invisible tool. Yeah.
All right. So in the military, there is complete invisibility. What about you, Chris?
I feel that we're definitely close to getting to a seamless integration. Obviously, there are still some limitations to what the technology can provide, but I feel that with creativity and a good sense of what people need, trainees need, and what's their level of understanding, you can get really far. For example, at KLM, we are when we're building a product, a training, as you will. We're not just dumping people within the training environment. We're not just throwing them into the airplane and saying, okay, now you're in the airplane. You were in the office 2 seconds ago, but hey, here you go. No. So what we do is, for example, we use portal technology, which when you put on your headset, you are actually still in the same environment. So we use the cameras on, for example, the HTC Vive Pro. So when you put on your headset, nothing has changed. You're still in the same room. So that gives people time to acclimatize, to get comfortable with wearing the headset. They get comfortable with the fact that they have hands, digital hands, and that they can interact with things. So for example, what we see is then they need to step into the virtual world. They need to step into the virtual classroom. So we give them a task. The task is, you need to open the airplane door. The airplane's doors don't open by themselves. They're quite a difficult procedure that you have to perform. And once you do that, you actually take the trainee along the journey from real reality to virtual reality, if you will, and also introducing them to the tools and the ways of interacting with the virtual reality. So by the time that they actually step into the airplane, into their virtual classroom where their instructor and their trainees are waiting for them, they already feel comfortable in that. And that also can help with the seamless integration of and the seamless experience for trainees. And by stepping into the virtual world, you're actually consciously making the decision to enter VR, which helps to support the trainee in his you're not forcing it on him.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Robert?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. We also found out our users are, well, they use clipboards and screwdrivers. If we are lucky, we get an age group which uses smartphones. So the digitalization hasn't reached the engineers we're targeting, at least. So we're introducing VR as a training method, as a training tool for them. So it's not invisible to them. So they need to deal with that first. So they need to learn how the controllers work or how the interactions work. They need to wear the device. And then a couple of interesting things. The the abstraction they need to make when they use a controller, and the controller represents a power drill or a screwdriver, or they need to use it to control a crane, for example. There's a level of abstraction they need to make to understand that the tool can't be used by a novice user, basically. So you need to have some kind of expertise already there. So you are able to train engineers who are already experts in repairing things and using their workshop, and they didn't start out there, they worked there several years already. Then they're ready to concentrate on the task and ignore what I call the VR shenanigans, basically. So it might be confusing at first, but once they learned it, they get used to it, and then VR kind of disappears, and they can focus on the actual tasks. So what we found out at the moment, it's a good way to learn the instructions step by step. So remove this, remove that, remove 4 screws, and there might be difficulties with the realism. So physics might not work correctly, or they need to lift 100 kilo plate, and in VR they can just grab it and throw it away. And in real world they need to they need to make sure they don't injure themselves when they do that. But that surprisingly works quite well, actually. So we found we don't even have to simulate weight. We did have some crazy ideas about that, but they're not really necessary. Which comes into play with our goals, because as mentioned before, we are trying to reduce costs. We are trying to do an online training, for example, so people don't have to fly around the globe to meet up in a real workshop. We try to reduce the costs of shipping the engine for training, and if we start integrating more hardware to compensate for the lack of sensory input in VR, for haptics and forces and other stuff, then we kind of counteract our cost reductions in some way. And luckily enough, it works out, so we don't have to do that. And that's interesting. So the technology kind of disappears, even though it's in some areas it's completely different than the real world. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
want to add something about that. When you said using a screwdriver while you're not having a screwdriver in your hand, but you're having a controller. That was one of the things we walked into. We had an internal customer who wanted a VR training tool, but they demanded it should be as real as possible. That was the reason we choose for gloves in this case. Was that the perfect option, the silver bullet? No, it wasn't. But it gave the participant the idea, okay, I'm pushing the button and he did this, and in real he would have done the same. And thinking in that way, currently, this may be interesting to mention, Technical University Delft in the Netherlands is currently working on an exoskeleton thing where you can have not only the haptics on your hand, which does already exist, but also on your upper arms. So if you have a confined space, for instance, in a fighting vehicle, my idea is, and it will take time since it's technically difficult, but eventually it will be possible that you have a software-defined mock-up. So with the press of a button, I can step from the one vehicle into another one, and I'm confined in the exact space. So I can touch the virtual walls and things like that. It's not there yet. And in the whole haptics field, there's a lot of development going on, I think. But eventually, if that haptics part comes into place, it will be more invisible, since it's more part of your experience. And we're working on that one.
Excellent. Now we'll throw it open for the audience to ask questions to the panelists here. Yeah. Can you pass the microphones, please?
David Metcalf. I run a tech research firm called Vedantics. One of the challenges that you mentioned has been the scalability of the industry. And I'm just interested to know, which is relevant for all of the panelists, who do you think should own the intellectual property to the content that you are developing or other people are developing for you? Because that seems to be a key part of the future growth.
For me, it depends. There's some kind of content which we, as a military, as a government organization, have to own, because for security reasons and things like that. But I can approach it in different ways. If I ask the enterprise to create a training solution for me, and I only want to pay for an availability, like for instance 40 weeks a year, 95% availability in this period, the enterprise can own the IP rights of the content. Then I'm just paying for a service. If I choose to do development on my own as a military organization, maybe it's a shared thing. For me, for us, it depends on the specific training need.
Yeah, from my point of view, I would really like to see that we can actually share more content, and because content is such a difficult thing. Well, it's not difficult, but it's just very time-consuming and very costly to develop. And if you look at a good training environment, a good training solution, a lot of it comes down to having good content, good interaction, and having good create environments and spaces where actually people can really manifest their behavior in a natural way. So in order to do that, you need a lot of content and interaction. So yeah, I mean, of course, everyone is entitled to keep everything to themselves. But if we could find some sort of solution that we could share more content together and create this pool that would benefit the whole of XR, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you also talked a bit on the governance model of the content and the IPs, right? Would you like to share a bit more on the collaborative endeavors that we could have in this field?
I'm not completely sure what you're referencing to, Ashok.
So, because he was talking about the IP and who owns the IP for the content creator, right?
Yeah.
So, which means there needs to be a broader governance model where collaborative research could happen, and there is the shared, sharing of content and sharing of IPs.
Yes.
So, would you like to?
Yeah, well, for Siemens it's an interesting thing, because when we do engineering training on an engine that Siemens has produced, well, at first it's sold as a service. So if you get the engine, you also get the training as a service, and the engineering, the CAD model itself contains maybe IP, maybe something that gives Siemens an edge over a competitor. So that content clearly belongs to Siemens, and Siemens is going to defend it, probably getting stolen. But the rest around it, like how it's developed, how the interactions are working, how an effective training can be created. What content you need there in that regard, in my opinion, should be open sourced. For example, I mean, if you produce trainings with just how to do trainings, like the didactics and the learning methods and what works, that shouldn't belong to a company specifically. There's also another issue which we faced when we're using tools. Like a power drill from Bosch, maybe. Then there's also the question, who has the rights for using that 3D model? Actually, in the workshop, it's clear you buy the drill and you use it, and you have a license for that for that real thing. Basically, you bought. When you do that for training, you have to create a 3D model for that, and then we actually faced the question: do we do some kind of generic power drill 3D model, or do we actually make it more realistic and call it Bosch or Enapac or whatever? And that's also something we face at the moment, because if our goal is to create a library of training objects, like a crane, a power drill and stuff.
Yeah.
So we can just choose from models to incorporate into our trainings. And we're probably going to get into some kind of trouble at some point in development. And that's the question, who does that belong to? And, if there should maybe be a different business model for that, like buy a physical screwdriver and get a digital copy of that. That would be very interesting, actually, for companies doing trainings.
Okay. Yeah. What do you? Yeah.
Hi. So I believe that you mentioned that you were looking at using a Vive Pro, which is like more of a virtual reality, and then I know some of the other things we've seen today use HoloLens, which is kind of an augmented reality. Do you think that kind of the virtual reality where the entire world is represented by a digital copy versus augmented reality where you have overlays on a physical object, do you think that one or the other would be more useful for training, or do you think it's much more dependent on use cases?
In my opinion, it's dependent on use cases.
Yeah.
Well, the best advantage of virtual reality is that you can just do anything without getting injured or without having the risk of dying, basically. And you can't break things, you can't damage them, you can't damage yourself. That's one of in engineering training, and probably also in in airplane safety trainings and in military training, it's probably the best thing about virtual reality. And for Siemens, it's basically also the cost factor. So if we do an augmented reality training, we need to have the subject we're training on available. And if we don't have that, you can still do it with augmented reality glasses and work on a virtual object. But at the moment, the hardware for virtual reality devices with the field of view and the tracking is, for that use case, more advanced than augmented reality devices. So, but that is going to merge at some point. So it probably won't matter if you use an augmented reality device in your living room to train on an engine, or if you use a virtual reality device to train on an engine. Yeah.
Well, it's a very good point I think you're putting up. For example, the living room situation. With virtual reality, you can be anywhere at any time. With augmented reality, that's very difficult. Or you'll still be in your living room, but then sort of not. So, I mean, that's definitely something that defines the value of VR versus AR. But then again, if you're training to some sort of procedure, yeah, great. If you're there, that makes a lot of sense. You don't have to rebuild everything.
Yeah, true.
There are more questions? Can we have a...
Oh, two at the same time. Interesting.
Hello.
We have 3 people.
Yeah, that's right. Go.
Hello. I just wanted to ask, what I can hear from companies, for example, for oil and gas companies and other companies, for trainings, they want to use not just native Unity or Unreal like engines to develop the content. They want to use some more platforms that will allow them to have their own avatars, their own tools to create scenario very fast and so on. So how do you do this? Do you have special platforms, or do you develop them, or do you use native game engine and that's it?
In the development phase, I'm working with interns, and they develop on open source platforms, especially to keep it open as easy as possible. But on a certain point, if you go to the more professional phase, then for me it doesn't really matter what kind of platform is being used. It's kind of coupling with the question about the IP rights. If I want to add something after I bought a product, and it's kind of a cooperation, then it would be nice if it's a platform which I can work on, obviously. But if I buy the service, I don't really care what kind of platform is being used, as long as it fits in my needs. And therefore, I need to exactly know what I want, and therefore I'm developing in open source and easy to access software. But in the end, as long as it delivers what it should be, for me it doesn't matter. I don't know how the other panelists look into that one. But
I think openness and freedom is very important, especially also when you're looking for the ability to change, the ability to adapt, and also the risk that if you rely too much on a certain platform and it fails to get supported, well, you especially if you have trainings which are being implemented, and you can say until a certain point you can say, oh, we still have the backup books somewhere on a shelf, but at some point they're not going to work anymore, and you're completely reliant on this training solution. And then once your platform doesn't get supported anymore, you're royally, you know, you need a screwdriver. But so yeah, that is really one of the major arguments on why you want to keep things for yourself. But that does mean that you need a team, you need a content base, a database, and all these things. And so it's not for everyone to be able to do that. No, that's definitely true. So yeah.
It has to be interoperable in some way. That's one of the demands we usually have.
Yeah.
It can be based on an engine, whatever, as long as it's interoperable with other platforms we already use. And then the manufacturer can choose whatever engine he wants.
Yeah. Okay, I think we are... One last question. Okay.
Hi. My question is a little bit less technical. Thinking back to when you first started using XR, what was the tipping point where you could finally convince someone to spend the money on the equipment, the content development, to transition from whatever you were doing before, whether a computer simulator or face-to-face training, into using XR? How did you convince those people, okay, now's the time to drop a couple $100,000 into this?
Tricky one, yeah.
Maybe, yeah. It's not an instant moment people are convinced. Some are hard to convince and some ask for it. Depends on the specific training purpose. For instance, we're using VR already for I think 15 or maybe longer years. A headset, imagine a headset, a bit bulky, heavy one. It's been wired from the ceiling because it's heavy and you don't want to drop it. It's made of glass partially.
So it's a television basically.
Yeah, kind of. It's an augmented reality headset. We already had that one. It's still in use, kind of. So that part of the training audience is already convinced that they need something like that. It has to deliver something. If the training method we use now is sufficient for the training needs, maybe it's not necessary to switch over. But for instance, right now we have big mock-ups. They're stationary, not easy to take with us. But if I want to train everywhere, anytime, it's easy to pack it in a suitcase, for instance. If that's a training demand, then you should look into other training means. It's all about what do you want to train, when do you want to train, and do you have the equipment already? Is there a need to switch to another kind of technology?
And there are also other options out there that doesn't have necessarily cost €1 million to get started. I mean, at KLM, my predecessor or my colleague that's supposed to be here, Chris Coleman, I think he started out with VR videos and photos and Matterport scans, which literally cost a few €1,000, but can be of tremendous value to so many people already. But also, you start massaging them a little bit. You start priming them for what's about to come, for the next phase. Unfortunately, I would say there's already a group of people who are not gonna be able to pull along anymore. Those are the early adapters who once had on a VR headset, like the first versions, and then someone said, "Oh, try this," and they secretly started a roller coaster. I mean, those people are never going to touch a VR headset again, you know. So that's also something that we have to be careful about. Like once you're introducing someone, try to make it a pleasant experience and try to think really carefully what you're introducing them to. But yeah, it can be very simple and still be very effective, and gradually build up from there. Make it show its value, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's showing the value is actually it's twofold. When you're out hunting for money, it's basically about the KPIs. How much can VR reduce costs, and that's always a good argument. The problem might be that they don't even know what it costs now without VR, and then it's difficult to compare that. For example, how do we measure the success of training and the quality today compared to now using VR or AR? And the other thing is then making sure that the users, the end users, are actually using your product and enjoying using your product. And that's about understanding what their problems are, and if they actually need VR or AR, and how you can use it the most effectively to solve their problem, basically. I mean, you can use VR and mess it up completely, and then no one is going to use it anymore. Yeah.